The dust-laden wind carried the mournful whistle of the departing train as Willow Frost and Winifred Fletcher stood abandoned on the wooden platform of Cottonwood Springs, their hopes scattered like tumbleweeds across the vast Wyoming Territory in the summer of 1875. Their carefully packed trunks sat beside them, containing the remnants of their former lives and dreams of new beginnings, dreams that now lay as barren as the distant plains stretching before them. Willow clutched the crumpled letter in her trembling hand, the ink smudged from her tears. "He isn't coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the settling silence of the now empty station. At 22, she had left behind her life as a seamstress in Boston, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride that promised security and perhaps, in time, affection. Beside her, Winifred Winnie, to those who knew her, stood rigid, her back straight despite the crushing weight of their shared predicament. At 24, she had traveled all the way from Philadelphia, where she had worked as a schoolteacher until the school closed. Her own letter of rejection had arrived just moments before the train did. "Neither is mine," Winnie replied, her blue eyes dry but haunted. "Mr. Henderson wrote that he found someone local, someone who didn't cost a train ticket, I imagine." The station master approached, an elderly man with kind eyes that couldn't quite mask his concern. "Ladies, I'm afraid I must lock up soon. Do you have arrangements for the night?" Willow and Winnie exchanged glances, the reality of their situation settling upon them like a shroud. They had no arrangements, no prospects, and precious little money between them. "We'll figure something out," Winnie answered with a confidence she didn't feel. As the station master retreated, leaving them to their uncertain fate, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the golden haze of late afternoon sun, followed by a wagon. The rider dismounted with the fluid grace of one accustomed to life in the saddle. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but as he approached, Willow noted the strong line of his jaw, weathered by sun and wind, and eyes the color of the endless Wyoming sky. "Evening, ladies," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy that seemed out of place in this rough frontier town. "I'm Vincent Lockhart. Most folks call me Vince. I run the El Bar Ranch about 5 miles north of here." His gaze swept over their trunks and the desolate platform. "You look like you might be waiting for someone." "We were," Winnie answered, her voice steady despite their circumstances. "But it seems our intended grooms have had changes of heart." Understanding dawned in Vince's eyes. It wasn't the first time mail-order brides had been left stranded in Cottonwood Springs. The harsh realities of frontier life often led men to make promises they couldn't or wouldn't keep. "That's a mighty tough spot to be in," he said, genuine compassion evident in his tone. "Town doesn't have much in the way of lodgings, especially for ladies without escorts." He hesitated, then continued. "My sister Rose runs the household at El Bar Ranch. We've got plenty of room and she'd welcome the company. You'd be safe there until you figure out your next steps." Willow cast a wary glance at Winnie. They had both heard tales of the dangers that could befall unaccompanied women in the West, but something in Vince's straightforward manner inspired confidence. "Why would you help us?" Willow asked, her voice soft but direct. Vince replaced his hat, adjusting it slightly against the setting sun. "Out here, folks look out for one another. It's how we survive." He gestured toward the wagon. "My ranch hand, Tom, can help with your trunks. No obligations beyond a safe place to stay tonight." After a brief, silent exchange, Willow and Winnie accepted his offer. What choice did they have? Their trunks were loaded into the wagon, and they climbed up beside Tom, a weathered man in his 50s with a kindly demeanor. Vince mounted his horse, leading the way out of town and into the vast, open country beyond. As they traveled, the land opened up before them, rolling grasslands punctuated by stands of cottonwood trees along the meandering creek beds. The setting sun painted the landscape in shades of amber and gold, a beauty that belied their circumstances. "It's different from the east," Winnie observed, breaking the silence. "So much space, so much sky." Tom nodded sagely. "Takes some getting used to." But there's something about this country that gets under your skin, makes it hard to imagine living anywhere else. Willow remained silent, watching Vince riding ahead, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the darkening horizon. She wondered what sort of man he truly was, this cowboy who had extended kindness to strangers. In Boston, such generosity would have come with expectations, conditions she wasn't prepared to meet. The El Bar Ranch appeared as they crested a gentle rise, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings arranged around a central yard. Lamplight glowed from the windows, warm and inviting against the encroaching dusk. As the wagon rolled to a stop, the front door of the house opened, and a woman stepped onto the porch. Rose Lockhart was a few years older than her brother, with the same striking blue eyes but a more weathered face, testament to the challenging life of a frontier woman. "Vince, you're late for supper," she called, then paused as she noticed the two women in the wagon. "And you've brought company." Vince dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn. "These ladies need a place to stay, Rose. Their intended husbands didn't show." Rose's expression softened immediately. "Well then, you've come to the right place. Come inside, the stew's still hot and there's fresh bread." Within the hour, Willow and Winnie found themselves seated at a large oak table, bowls of fragrant beef stew before them, surrounded by the warmth of the Lockhart home. Rose's efficiency had already arranged sleeping quarters in a spare room, and the ranch hands, a collection of men of varying ages who took their meals in the main house, had tactfully withdrawn after dinner, leaving the women to talk. "It happens more often than folks would like to admit," Rose said, pouring coffee into sturdy mugs. "Men out here get desperate for companionship, write those advertisements with all manner of promises, then panic when it comes time to follow through. Or find someone else in the meantime," Winnie added, her tone matter of fact despite the hurt underlying her words. Vince, who had been quiet during dinner, studied both women with thoughtful consideration. "What skills do you bring?" he asked. "Not that it matters for your stay here, but it might help determine your options moving forward." Willow straightened in her chair. "I'm a seamstress. I can sew anything from everyday work clothes to fine dresses. And I was a school teacher," Winnie offered. "I can read and write, keep accounts, and I know basic medicine." Rose exchanged a glance with her brother. "Cottonwood Springs has been trying to establish a proper school for over a year now, and there isn't a decent seamstress within 50 miles. "Those are discussions for another day," Vince said, rising from the table. "For now, you ladies should rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to consider your futures." That night, sharing a comfortable if simple room with two narrow beds, Willow and Winnie whispered in the darkness, each finding solace in the other's presence. "What do you make of them?" Winnie asked, her voice hushed. Willow considered the question. "I think they're good people. But I'm not sure what happens next. I can't go back to Boston. I spent nearly everything I had on that train ticket." "Same for me with Philadelphia," Winnie sighed. "Perhaps we could stay in Cottonwood Springs. Between your sewing and my teaching, we might make a life." "Perhaps," Willow agreed, though a vision of Vince Lockhart's steady gaze flashed in her mind. She pushed the thought away. She had come west seeking a husband, and that dream had crumbled before it began. She wouldn't be so foolish as to nurture new hopes so quickly. Morning brought the bustling activity of ranch life. Vince and his men were already out working when Willow and Winnie joined Rose for breakfast. After helping with the morning dishes, Willow noticed a pile of mending in a basket near the hearth. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the work. Rose looked surprised, then grateful. "If you're sure. Most of it is just torn shirts and pants from the men working with barbed wire and such." By midday, Willow had repaired a dozen garments with such skill that Rose was visibly impressed. "You weren't exaggerating about your abilities," she commented, examining a nearly invisible mend on a flannel shirt. Meanwhile, Winnie had discovered the ranch's rudimentary ledger system and, with Rose's permission, had begun organizing it more efficiently. "This will make it easier to track expenses and income," she explained, her methodical mind finding comfort in the orderly rows of figures. When Vince returned for the noon meal, he found both women fully engaged in making themselves useful. A smile touched his lips as he watched Willow's nimble fingers work a needle through fabric, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said as they sat down to eat. "Rose appreciates the help, and there's plenty of work to go around." Winnie glanced at Willow before responding. "That's very generous, but we don't want to impose. We should make plans to establish ourselves in town." Vince nodded, understanding their need for independence. "I'm heading into Cottonwood Springs tomorrow. I can make inquiries about opportunities there, if you'd like." That evening, as the sunset painted the western sky in vibrant hues, Willow found herself alone on the porch, seeking a moment of solitude to process the tumultuous changes in her life. The sound of boots on wooden steps alerted her to Vince's approach. "Mind some company?" he asked, his voice gentle in the gathering dusk. She shook her head, and he settled into a chair beside her, stretching his long legs out before him. "It's beautiful here," Willow said after a comfortable silence. "Different from anything I've known, but beautiful." Vince nodded, his gaze sweeping over the land he'd worked for the past 8 years. "It gets in your blood, the freedom of it, the challenge." He turned to look at her. "Why did you decide to become a mail-order bride, if you don't mind my asking?" Willow considered her answer carefully. "Security, I suppose. My parents died 3 years ago, and I've been on my own since then. The sewing shop where I worked was closing, and I saw an advertisement." She trailed off, embarrassed by the naivety that had led her here. "And your intended, what did you know of him?" His name was Robert Miller. He wrote that he had a successful ranch near Cottonwood Springs. He seemed kind in his letters, respectful. She sighed. His final letter said he'd realized he wasn't ready for marriage after all. At least he had the decency to write before I arrived. Vince's expression darkened. "There's no Robert Miller ranching around here. Never has been, as far as I know." The implications of his words settled over her like a cold fog. She'd been deceived from the beginning. "I'm sorry," Vince said softly, seeing the realization in her eyes. "Some men play cruel games without thought for the consequences." Willow nodded, fighting back tears. "And now here I am, stranded in a place I never imagined, with no clear path forward." "Sometimes the unexpected turns in the trail lead to the best destinations," Vince offered, his voice warm in the gathering darkness. The next day, Vince departed for town as promised, leaving Willow and Winnie to continue helping Rose with various household tasks. They worked well together, and by afternoon, Rose was openly admiring their contributions. "You two have done more in 2 days than I've managed in weeks," she remarked as they prepared vegetables for the evening meal. "I haven't had much female company since our mother passed 5 years ago. It's nice having other women around." Winnie smiled, a rare, full expression that transformed her serious countenance. "It's nice to feel useful again. I was beginning to think I'd made a terrible mistake coming west." "And your intended?" Rose asked gently. "What was his story?" "Harold Henderson claimed to be a shopkeeper in need of a wife with education to help with his business and start a family," Winnie explained, her knife moving steadily through a pile of carrots. "His letter said he'd found a local girl instead, someone whose family could contribute to his business." Rose shook her head in disgust. "Men can be callous creatures, present company's brother excluded, of course." Willow looked up from her work, curiosity piqued. "Vince seems different from what I expected of Western men, more thoughtful." "He is that," Rose agreed. "Too thoughtful sometimes. Keeps to himself more than is good for him. This ranch was our father's dream, and Vince has worked himself to the bone making it successful. But a man needs more than work to sustain him." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Rose's words lingered in Willow's mind. That evening, when Vince returned from town, he brought news that quickened both women's pulses. "The town council is eager to meet Miss Fletcher," he announced over dinner. "They've been trying to establish a proper school for months, but qualified teachers are scarce out here, and Mrs. Wilson, who runs the general store, was particularly interested in your sewing skills, Miss Frost. She says there's a real need for someone who can do fine work." Winnie's face lit with hope. A teaching position would be wonderful. When could we meet with them? I told them you'd need some time to settle and consider your options. Perhaps next week. Vince looked between the two women, his expression unreadable. There's no rush. You're welcome here as long as you need. That night, Willow dreamed of endless prairies and a figure on horseback silhouetted against the setting sun. She woke with a sense of possibility that had been absent since her arrival in Wyoming. The days fell into a rhythm as Willow and Winnie integrated themselves into the daily life of the El Bar Ranch. They helped Rose with cooking and cleaning, Willow mended and altered clothing for the ranch hands, and Winnie organized the ranch's accounts into a system that impressed even the taciturn Vince. A week passed, then another. The visit to town was postponed due to a sudden spring storm that made the roads impassable, and neither woman seemed particularly eager to rush their departure. One afternoon, Willow found herself alone with Vince in the barn, where she had gone to return a repaired saddle blanket. He was brushing down his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding named Thunder. He's beautiful, Willow said, admiring the animal's glossy coat. Vince nodded, pride evident in his expression. Raised him from a colt. He's the best cutting horse in 3 counties. He hesitated, then added, would you like to learn to ride? Proper riding, I mean, not just sitting in a wagon being pulled along. Willow's eyes widened. Me, on a horse? Unless you're afraid, Vince teased gently, a rare smile lighting his features. I'm not afraid, she replied, lifting her chin in mock defiance. I'm just concerned about propriety. Vince laughed, a rich sound that echoed in the rafters. Miss Frost, this is Wyoming Territory. Propriety takes different forms out here. Besides, Rose has an old riding skirt that might fit you. And so, the following day found Willow perched somewhat uncertainly on a gentle mare named Daisy, with Vince walking beside her, leading the horse around the corral. After an initial period of terror, Willow began to enjoy the sensation of movement, the connection with the powerful animal beneath her. That's it, Vince encouraged as she straightened her back and relaxed her grip on the reins. You're a natural. From the edge of the corral, Winnie watched with Rose, both women smiling at Willow's progress and the uncharacteristic animation in Vince's expression as he instructed her. Your brother seems taken with her, Winnie observed quietly. Rose nodded, her expression thoughtful. And she with him, I think, though neither would admit it yet. She turned to Winnie. And what about you? Tom mentioned you've been spending time with him in the evenings, discussing books. Winnie blushed slightly, a rare break in her composed demeanor. He's well read for a ranch hand. It's refreshing to have intellectual conversations again. Rose's smile widened. Tom was a professor back east before the war changed everything for him. He doesn't talk about it much, but he's got more education than most anyone in the territory. As the days lengthened into summer, both women found themselves increasingly reluctant to leave the ranch. The trip to town had been made, with promising discussions about Winnie establishing a school and Willow setting up a sewing business, possibly in a corner of the general store. But neither had committed to a timeline for their departure. Instead, they found themselves drawn deeper into ranch life and into the lives of the men who had initially offered them only temporary sanctuary. Winnie and Tom spent long evenings discussing literature and history, their intellectual connection blossoming into something neither had anticipated. And Willow found herself eagerly awaiting the riding lessons that had become a daily occurrence, cherishing the time spent with Vince as he patiently taught her to handle Daisy with increasing confidence. One golden evening in late June, Vince suggested they ride out to a special spot he knew. It's about an hour's ride, he told Willow, but I think you're ready for a longer journey and the view is worth it. With Winnie's knowing smile sending them off, Willow rode beside Vince through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. The Wyoming landscape had begun to work its magic on her, the vast openness no longer intimidating but exhilarating. They reached a high ridge just as the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the valley below. The El Bar Ranch was visible in the distance, a collection of buildings nestled against the backdrop of mountains. It's breathtaking, Willow said, dismounting with Vince's help and walking to the edge of the ridge. Vince stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. This is my thinking spot. When decisions need making or troubles need sorting, I come here. Willow glanced at him curiously. And what decisions bring you here today? Vince met her gaze, his blue eyes serious. Important ones, about the future. He took a deep breath. Willow, I know you came west expecting to marry a stranger who deceived you, and I know we haven't known each other long, but in these weeks I've come to care for you more than I thought possible. Willow's heart fluttered in her chest, hope and fear intermingling. Vince. I'm not asking for any promises right now, he continued quickly. Just consider staying, not as our guest, but as someone who might, in time, see this place as home, see me as someone who could be more than just a helpful neighbor. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. I've been thinking about staying, she admitted softly. Every day, the idea of leaving becomes more difficult to imagine. Vince's expression lightened, hope evident in his eyes. Then stay. Give us a chance to grow naturally. As the setting sun gilded the landscape in golden light, Willow found herself nodding, a sense of rightness settling over her. This wasn't the future she had journeyed west to find, but perhaps it was the one she was meant to discover. Back at the ranch, a similar conversation was unfolding between Winnie and Tom as they sat on a bench beneath a sprawling cottonwood tree. Tom's weathered hand covered Winnie's smaller one as they discussed possibilities neither had dared consider when they first met. I never expected to find someone who understands me the way you do, Winnie confessed, her usual reserve softening in the twilight. When my intended rejected me, I thought it was the end of my hopes. Now I see it may have been the beginning. Tom's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. I came west to escape painful memories, only to find new joy I never thought I'd experience again. The following weeks brought rapid changes to the El Bar Ranch. With Vince's encouragement and financial backing, Winnie began preparations to open a small school on the ranch, not just for the children of nearby homesteaders, but also for the ranch hands who wished to improve their reading and writing skills. Tom, with his academic background, would assist her when his ranch duties allowed. Willow, meanwhile, set up a sewing room in a sunny corner of the main house, where she began creating practical garments with touches of beauty that quickly became sought after by families in the surrounding area. Word spread, and soon she had more work than she could easily manage. By August, what had begun as temporary arrangements had solidified into something permanent. One warm evening, the four of them, Vince and Willow, Tom and Winnie, sat on the porch after dinner, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. Rose had retired early, but not before expressing her approval of the changes taking place under her roof. I received a letter today, Vince said, breaking a comfortable silence. From the land office in Cheyenne, that parcel to the east that I've had my eye on. It's available, 160 acres with water rights. Tom nodded appreciatively. That's prime land, good move expanding now. Vince turned to Willow, his expression serious yet tender. I was thinking it would be a fine place to build a new house, a home for a family. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. If that family included you, Willow, I'd be the happiest man in the territory. Willow's breath caught in her throat. Though their feelings had grown steadily over the summer, neither had spoken so directly of marriage. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Vincent Lockhart? His smile was as warm as the summer night. I believe I am, Miss Frost. I'm asking if you might consider becoming Mrs. Lockhart, not because you answered an advertisement or traveled across the country seeking security, but because we've found something genuine together. Tears pricked at Willow's eyes as joy welled within her. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, I would be honored to become your wife. Beside them, Winnie reached for Tom's hand, their own unspoken understanding evident in the tender gesture. The rejection they had both faced upon their arrival in Wyoming Territory now seemed like a blessing in disguise, steering them toward a happiness neither had dared imagine. The wedding took place in October, when the aspens had turned to gold and the first hint of winter crispness touched the air. It was a double ceremony, with Vince and Willow exchanging vows alongside Tom and Winnie, surrounded by friends from the ranch and the growing community of Cottonwood Springs. Rose, beaming with approval, had outdone herself preparing the ranch for the celebration. The house gleamed, tables groaned with food, and wildflowers gathered from the last blooms of the season adorned every surface. Willow wore a dress of her own creation, simple yet elegant, with lace she had carefully salvaged from the wedding gown she'd packed in her trunk many months before a gown meant for a different wedding, a different life. Winnie chose a deep blue that matched the Wyoming sky, adorned with a cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother. As the couples exchanged their vows beneath an arch of twisted branches and autumn flowers, Willow caught Winnie's eye and saw in her friend's face the same wonder she herself felt. They had come west seeking security and finding instead a love neither had expected, a love born not from desperation or convenience, but from genuine connection and mutual respect. The celebration lasted well into the night, with fiddle music, dancing, and more genuine goodwill than either bride had ever experienced. As stars blanketed the vast Wyoming sky, Vince led Willow away from the festivities to a moment of privacy on the porch. Happy? He asked, his arms encircling her waist as they gazed out at the land that was now truly their home. More than I ever imagined possible, she replied, leaning into his embrace. When I stepped off that train and found my intended groom missing, I thought my life was over. Now I see it was just beginning. Vince's kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together. Welcome home, Mrs. Lockhart. Inside, Tom and Winnie shared a similar moment of quiet joy, their intellectual connection having deepened into a love that surprised them both in its intensity and rightness. To think, Winnie mused, her head resting against Tom's shoulder, if our intended grooms had met us at the station, we would never have found our way here, never have discovered this happiness. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments, Tom replied, his academic voice warm with emotion. By the following spring, the El Bar Ranch had expanded with the addition of a small schoolhouse, where Winnie taught not only the children from nearby homesteads, but also several of the ranch hands eager to improve their education. Tom assisted with lessons when his duties allowed, his knowledge of history and literature bringing the wider world to this remote corner of Wyoming. Willow's sewing business flourished, with orders coming from as far away as Cheyenne for her skillfully crafted garments. She divided her time between her work and helping Vince with the ranch, discovering an unexpected love for the rhythm of ranch life and the connection to the land that had become so dear to her. Construction began on the new house at the eastern edge of the ranch property, a home designed with future children in mind. Rose insisted she was perfectly content remaining in the original ranch house, especially with Tom and Winnie taking up residence in the newly expanded East Wing. On a perfect day in late May, exactly 1 year after they had stepped off the train into uncertainty, Willow and Winnie sat together on a blanket beneath a flowering apple tree that Rose had planted years before. Both women were expecting their first children, Willow due in summer, Winnie in early fall. Could you have imagined this? Willow asked, her hand resting on her rounded belly. A year ago, abandoned and afraid, and now, Winnie smiled, her once serious face now frequently alight with happiness. Never. I thought I was coming west to make the best of a difficult situation. Instead, I found everything I never knew I wanted. She glanced toward the schoolhouse where Tom was finishing up a lesson. I believe they call that providence. Or perhaps just extraordinary luck, Willow suggested, watching as Vince rode in from the distant pastures, his figure as compelling to her now as it had been the first time she saw him approaching the train station. As the men joined them in the dappled shade, bringing water from the well and news of the day's work, Willow reflected on the strange twists of fate that had led them all to this moment. 2 mail-order brides, abandoned by their intended grooms, had found not just shelter but true love and purpose in this wild, beautiful country. Vince settled beside her, his hand covering hers where it rested on their unborn child. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Lockhart." Willow leaned against his solid strength, contentment washing through her like the gentle Wyoming breeze. "I was just thinking that sometimes the end of one dream makes room for another, far better one to take its place." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the vast Wyoming sky in shades of gold and amber, the four of them remained beneath the flowering apple tree, bound together by love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of circumstances, proof that even in the wild and often unforgiving West, hearts could find their true homes.